Hey there. I'm Chloe Bennett, 34, from a quaint little corner of New Jersey, where the fall leaves put on a better show than Broadway, and people hide their childhood traumas behind impeccably decorated front porches. And this is the story of how I accidentally became a local hero while trying to nurse my wounded pride and piece together the shattered remnants of my self-worth after my family decided I wasn't worth setting an extra place at the table. You know how some people say family is everything? Well, mine decided I was nothing. At least for Thanksgiving dinner. And not for the first time. It started with a text. One of those seemingly innocuous messages that somehow manages to detonate your entire emotional landscape while you're standing in the cereal aisle debating between adult fiber or the sugary childhood nostalgia you actually want. My sister-in-law, Melissa. Hey, Chloe. Small change of plans for Thanksgiving. We're keeping it really intimate this year. Just immediate family. Hope you understand. Immediate family. The words hung there, suspended between us like an accusation. Last time I checked, being my brother's only sister qualified me as immediate family, but apparently marriage comes with the power to redraw family trees. The little heart emoji at the end felt like a final twist of the knife, a pink, sparkly Band-Aid slapped on a gunshot wound. I stared at my phone so long the screen dimmed, then went black. A perfect metaphor for how I felt inside. My shopping cart stood abandoned, half filled with ingredients for the sweet potato casserole I'd promised to bring. The one with the secret ingredient that everyone raved about last year. Well, everyone except Melissa, who'd asked if I'd considered updating the recipe to something more modern. Because apparently sweet potatoes with brown sugar and pecans were some sort of culinary dinosaur that hadn't gotten the extinction memo. A wave of familiar heaviness washed over me, that sinking sensation that's been my constant companion since childhood. The feeling of not quite measuring up, of taking up too much space while somehow never being enough. I could almost hear my mother's voice. Chloe, did you have to wear that? Or, Chloe, must you always have an opinion? Or my personal favorite, Chloe, we're just trying to help you be your best self. As if my current self was a rough draft that needed heavy editing. I grabbed my cart and started mechanically returning items to their shelves. No need for heavy cream now. The fresh herbs could wilt somewhere else. The organic pecans that cost more than I'd like to admit could be someone else's splurge. With each item I put back, I felt myself getting smaller. By the time I reached the register with nothing but a pint of premium ice cream and a bottle of reasonably priced Merlot, I had practically disappeared. Here's the context you need. My brother Jake and I had been doing Thanksgiving together since our parents moved to Arizona 5 years ago. We'd created our own little tradition. He'd cook the turkey, always slightly dry, but we never mentioned it. And I'd handle sides and atmosphere, which meant actually decorating and not just throwing a pumpkin on the table and calling it festive. Before that, holidays with our parents had been exercises in walking on eggshells, Mom's perfectionism, and Dad's quiet disapproval, creating a pressure cooker where one wrong word could trigger a silent treatment that lasted until Christmas. Jake had been my ally back then. We'd exchange glances across the table, develop elaborate codes to communicate while our parents argued about the correct way to carve a turkey or whether the napkins matched the table runner. We'd sneak leftovers to my room later and whisper, our real thoughts, our real selves, safe in the bubble of sibling understanding. Then Melissa came along. Beautiful, perfect Melissa, with her Pinterest-worthy dinner spreads and subtle comments about my perpetual singleness. It's just so brave how you focus on your career instead of settling down, she'd say, while adjusting her 3-carat engagement ring. Or, have you tried that new dating app? I hear they have options for people who are, getting up there. Getting up where, exactly? The summit of Mount Spinsterhood? But it wasn't just the singleness comments. It was the way she'd help by suggesting different haircuts that would slim my face, or sending links to articles about minimizing living spaces since you're just one person. It was the birthday gift of a self-help book about finding inner peace. Subtitle: when your life hasn't gone according to plan. It was the constant stream of little cuts, each one too small to reasonably complain about, but collectively turning me into an emotional colander, everything good draining right through. Still, I'd tried. God knows I had tried. I brought wine. They actually liked. Asked about her crystal-infused wellness business, and even held my tongue when she suggested my apartment would look so much more grown up with different furniture. I laughed when she joked about my funky fashion sense to her friends at their housewarming party. I pretended not to notice when she rearranged the appetizers I'd brought to their Christmas gathering. And now, just like that, I was out. Erased, with a text and an emoji. I called Jake immediately. His response was worse than the text. It's just, Mel's parents are coming, and her sister with the twins. And honestly, the house gets so crowded. He paused, lowering his voice. And you know how you get sometimes, Chloe, how I get. My voice climbed several octaves, joining the stratosphere where only dogs and injured dolphins could hear my pain. You know, opinionated. Mel's just worried about the vibe. Her family's really traditional, and your whole everything can be a lot. My whole everything. 34 years of existence reduced to an inconvenience, a potential vibe ruiner. The awkward sister who talks too much about social justice and doesn't know how to make appropriate small talk about property. Values in school districts. So, what you're saying is, I'm too much for Thanksgiving. Is there a quantity limit on personality I should be aware of? A feelings quota? I was aiming for sarcasm, but landed somewhere closer to wounded animal. Jake sighed that particular sigh he'd developed since marrying Melissa, part exhaustion, part preemptive surrender. Don't make this a bigger deal than it is. You can come for Christmas, probably. Probably. The word hung between us like a sad, deflated balloon. Right, I said, my voice now eerily calm. Wouldn't want to ruin the vibe with my whole everything. Tell Melissa I hope her table setting coordinates with her soul. I hung up and did what any mature adult would do. Bought ice cream instead of groceries, went home, and cried while scrolling through Instagram photos of everyone else's perfect families. I sent regretful texts to the friends who'd invited me to join their Thanksgivings, which I'd declined because family comes first. The irony was not lost on me as I licked Chunky Monkey off a spoon and contemplated how I'd become the chunky monkey my family was ashamed of. By 2 a.m., I'd moved from ice cream to wine, from Instagram to old family photos. There was Jake and me building a snowman, gap-toothed and grinning. There was teenage Jake with his arm around me at my high school graduation, both of us looking like we'd escaped something. When had he stopped being on my team? When had I become the family member they tolerated rather than welcomed? I found myself doing that thing again, that mental review of everything I'd said or done wrong at previous gatherings. Was it the comment about factory farming when Melissa served ham last Easter? The time I brought my friend Miguel, and everyone assumed he was a date because apparently a straight woman can't have male friends. Or maybe it was the constant, unforgivable crime of being single, childless, and too loud in a family that valued quiet conformity above all else. By the next morning, my sadness had crystallized into something harder, something with edges. I'm not someone who wallows, at least not for long. I'm more the type who channels emotions into questionable decisions that somehow work out in the end. Usually. My apartment felt too small, too empty with the knowledge that Thanksgiving would be spent there alone. I grabbed my coat and headed to Riverside Park, where the November air bit at my cheeks and the Hudson River rolled on, indifferent to human dramas. That's where I saw him. An older man feeding pigeons, his coat too thin for the weather, a shopping cart of belongings parked nearby. Harold was his name, I learned after sitting down and offering him half my bagel. He hadn't had a proper Thanksgiving dinner in 9 years, not since his wife passed. Nobody wants an old man at their table, he said matter-of-factly, not with self-pity but with the resigned acceptance of someone who'd made peace with invisibility. Something clicked inside me then, an idea so perfect in its simplicity, so right in its wrongness. A way to transform rejection into connection, exclusion into belonging. What if, I said slowly, the plan forming as I spoke, we had our own Thanksgiving? For people who don't have anywhere else to go? Harold looked at me like I'd suggested. We fly to the moon, but I was already pulling out my phone, creating an event, fingers flying faster than my common sense could intervene. Orphan Thanksgiving, I typed. No family to celebrate with? Join us for food, company, and zero judgment. About your life choices, political opinions, or how many dinner rolls you eat. Bring a dish if you can, just yourself if you can't. Community Center on 83rd, 2 p.m. Thanksgiving Day. I posted it everywhere. Neighborhood Facebook groups, local Reddit, the bulletin board at my coffee shop, and the community center where I sometimes volunteered. The center director, Maria, didn't even hesitate when I called with my wild proposal. So, you want to host a free Thanksgiving dinner for strangers with 3 days' notice? She paused. I love it. The small hall is yours. What followed was a blur of activity. Lists upon lists, budget calculations, decoration scrounging. I called in every favor, emptied my modest savings, and embraced the beautiful insanity of it all. My apartment became command central, piled with borrowed slow cookers and donated tablecloths. Friends thought I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was, but it felt more like breakthrough. Like I was finally creating something that mattered, instead of trying to fit into spaces that weren't built for me. I found myself sharing my plans with everyone I encountered. The woman who walked 8 shelter, dogs every morning, the night nurse getting off shift at the corner deli, the elderly couple who always sat in the same spot at the cafe. Some looked concerned, others amused, but a surprising number said, "Can I come?" Each yes felt like a tiny stitch in a wound I hadn't realized was still bleeding. Each offer of help. The restaurant owner who promised a turkey, the college student who volunteered to design flyers, even the grumpy superintendent who grudgingly loaned me folding chairs, was a reminder that connection didn't have to be earned through bloodlines or perfection. The night before Thanksgiving, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with logistics, with anxieties, with the terrifying possibility of public failure. What if nobody showed up? What if too many people showed up? What if this whole thing was just a desperate attempt to prove I wasn't as disposable as my family had made me feel? I sat on my fire escape at midnight, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the city lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Hey, just checking you're okay with tomorrow. Mel feels bad. Not bad enough to actually invite me, apparently." I left it on read another text, this time from Mom in Arizona. "Heard you're not going to your brother's tomorrow. You really should make more of an effort with Melissa, honey. Family harmony requires compromise." Ah, yes, the familiar refrain. Compromise, in my family being code for, Chloe should shrink herself to make everyone else comfortable. I turned, my phone off. The morning of Thanksgiving arrived with a flutter of anxiety in my stomach and a strange sense of purpose in my chest. I donned my favorite dress, the emerald green one with the swishy skirt that Melissa once described as brave for your body type, and headed to the community center 3 hours early. I spent those hours arranging tables, setting up serving stations, and obsessively checking the 3 turkeys I'd convinced local restaurants to donate. Harold arrived early, wearing a tie I suspected he'd had since the 70s, insisting on helping with the chairs despite his arthritic hands. "You know," he said, carefully unfolding a chair, "I used to host neighborhood barbecues every summer. 50, 60 people sometimes. Maya Lane made the best potato salad you ever tasted." He smiled, lost in memory. "Haven't done anything like that since she passed. Felt like maybe that part of me was gone too." I looked at him, really looked, and saw something I recognized. That mixture of loneliness and longing, of having so much to give and nowhere to put it. Well, I said, handing him a stack of napkins to fold. Looks like that part of you was just waiting for the right potato salad emergency. He laughed, a rusty sound, like a door being opened after a long winter. And I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about proving my family wrong anymore. It was about something bigger, something I couldn't quite name yet. 2:00 came. I stood at the door, heart in my throat, palms damp with nervous sweat. The hall looked festive but sparse. Paper turkeys made by the community center's after-school program, string lights borrowed from a neighbor, mismatched tablecloths covering the scratched folding tables. Not exactly the Instagram-worthy setting of Melissa's dining room, with its carefully curated centerpieces and color-coordinated place settings. And then they came. Slowly at first, then in steady streams. The retired teacher who'd lost her husband in June, the college students who couldn't afford flights home, the young couple with a newborn who'd been disowned by disapproving parents, the bus driver working a double shift who just had time for a quick plate, Harold's friends from the park, a woman and her teenage daughter who'd just moved to the city and didn't know anyone yet, the barista from my coffee shop, still wearing her apron. People brought what they could. Homemade rolls, store-bought pies, family recipes scribbled on index cards, bottles of wine, packets of paper plates when we started running low. One woman arrived with nothing but tears in her eyes, explaining she'd just found the event online and didn't have time to prepare anything. You brought yourself, I told her, surprising myself with how much I meant it. That's more than enough. What struck me most was how easily conversation flowed among strangers. No one had to navigate decades-old family tensions or tiptoe around sensitive subjects. Instead, people shared stories openly, about favorite Thanksgiving memories, about loss, about hope. The young couple passed their baby around like a living symbol of new beginnings. The college students taught Harold how to take a selfie. The retired teacher started a spontaneous sing-along when she discovered the pianist from the community church at the dessert table. Somewhere between serving mashed potatoes and refilling water glasses, I noticed a camera crew setting up in the corner. Maria had called the local news station, thinking the event might make a nice human interest segment for the evening broadcast. Just a feel-good story about community, the reporter explained, adjusting her blazer. Would you mind saying a few words about what inspired you to organize this? I hadn't planned on telling my story on camera. I certainly hadn't planned on crying while doing so. But there I was, explaining how exclusion had led to inclusion, how rejection had created connection. Sometimes, I said, looking around at the room full of laughing, eating strangers who didn't feel like strangers anymore. The family you need isn't the one you're born into. It's the one you find, or create, when you're brave enough to open your door. Everyone here today has a story of feeling left out, overlooked, or not quite right for the spaces they were supposed to fit into. But look around. I gestured. To the joyful chaos of the room, turns out we fit perfectly together. The reporter asked a follow-up question, something about my own family situation, and I felt that familiar tightness in my chest, the one that appears whenever I have to acknowledge the gap between the family I have and the one I've always wanted. My family decided to keep their Thanksgiving intimate this year, I said carefully, the practiced smile I'd perfected at 1,000 uncomfortable family gatherings sliding into place. Just immediate family. And that doesn't include you? She asked, her perfectly shaped eyebrows rising slightly. The question hung in the air between us. I could have smoothed it over, made an excuse about scheduling conflicts or prior commitments. I could have protected my family's image, as I'd been trained to do since childhood. Instead, I took a deep breath and said, "No, it doesn't." My sister-in-law felt I might disrupt the vibe, and maybe she was right. Maybe I would have. But here, I looked around at our mismatched gathering, at the paper plates and borrowed decorations, and the unmistakable warmth of genuine connection. Here, I get to be fully myself, And it turns out, that self isn't too much after all. It's exactly right. The segment aired during the 6 o'clock news, right about when I imagined Melissa would be serving her perfect turkey to her perfect family in her perfect dining room. I wasn't watching. I was still at the community center, helping with cleanup, exchanging phone numbers with my new friends, making plans for coffee dates and movie nights. It wasn't until I got home, exhausted, but filled with a strange new lightness, that I saw my phone exploding with notifications. The segment had been picked up by the national affiliate. It was trending on local social media. People were sharing it with hashtags like Cha's True Giving and Cha's Chosen Family, and my actual family was blowing up my phone. Jake first, his voicemail tinged with confusion and something that might have been shame. "Chloe, we saw you on the news. Melissa's parents recognized you, and it looks amazing what you did. I didn't realize. Call me, okay?" Then Mom, her text a masterpiece of passive-aggressive concern. "Darling, was it really necessary to air family matters on television? We're worried about you. This grand gesture seems like a cry for attention. Call your brother and apologize." Dad, surprisingly, sent a short text that simply read, "Proud of you, kiddo. Your grandmother would have loved this." It was the most direct approval he'd expressed in years. Then came messages from cousins, aunts, college friends, co-workers. Many expressing surprise at learning I'd been excluded, others sharing their own stories of family tension during the holidays. My phone became a confessional for all the complicated feelings that lurk beneath the picture-perfect holiday narratives we're supposed to maintain. But the message that mattered most came the next day, in the form of handwritten notes from attendees, dropped off at the community center. Thank yous and stories and invitations for coffee. The retired teacher wanted to start a book club. The college students offered tech help. Harold had drawn a picture of the park where we'd met, surprisingly detailed from memory. Melissa finally called late Friday night. I let it go to voicemail, then listened as she stumbled through an apology that wasn't really an apology. "I just want you to know," she said, her voice tight with the effort of humility, "that we would have invited you if we'd known you had nowhere else to go. Jake didn't. Say you were going to be completely alone, and now everyone's seen that news segment. And my parents are upset that we excluded family, which isn't fair because you're always welcome, just not. I mean, it was a space issue, really, and my sister's twins take up so much room." She continued for another minute, her words circling the drain of justification without ever quite finding the humility to admit she'd been unkind. I deleted the message halfway through. Jake showed up at my door Saturday morning, looking like he hadn't slept well. "Can I come in?" he asked, shifting uncomfortably in the hallway of my building. I let him in, offering coffee which he accepted, gratefully. We sat at my small kitchen table in awkward silence for a moment, before he finally spoke. "I should have stood up for you," he said simply. "I've been not standing up for you for a long time, and I'm sorry." The apology, unexpected and unqualified, loosened something in my chest. "Yeah, well, I'm not exactly easy to stand up for sometimes." He shook his head. "That's the thing, Chloe. You are. You always were. You were the brave one who said what needed saying, who didn't shrink herself to make others comfortable. I used to admire that about you. Then somewhere along the way, I started, resenting it because it highlighted my own cowardice." "You're not a coward," I said automatically, the big sister instinct to protect still strong despite everything. "I am, though. I knew Melissa was wrong to exclude you. I knew it would hurt you. But I took the path of least resistance, like I always do." He stared into his coffee cup. "Watching you on the news, seeing what you created out of our rejection, it made me realize how small my life has become trying to avoid conflict, trying to keep the peace at all costs. We talked for hours, really talked, in a way we hadn't since we were kids whispering under blankets during family vacations, about our parents' subtle favoritism, about the ways we'd both been shaped by the family dynamic, about the gap between the siblings we'd once been and the adults we'd become. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. There were still hard edges of hurt, still moments where voices rose and tears threatened. But it was real in a way our interactions hadn't been in years. "I can't promise Melissa will change," he said finally, as he was leaving. "But I can promise that I will. No more sacrificing you to keep the peace." I didn't know if I believed him. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend with a single conversation. But it was a start. My Thanksgiving hadn't gone according to anyone's plan, least of all mine. I hadn't sat at a perfectly set table or followed familiar traditions. Instead, I'd found something I didn't know I was looking for: community, purpose. The kind of belonging that doesn't require an invitation or come with conditions about acceptable behavior. Melissa still hasn't offered a genuine apology. My mother continues to suggest that I was being dramatic about the whole situation. Family dynamics don't transform overnight, and old patterns have a stubborn way of reasserting themselves. But something has shifted, both within my family and within me. Jake came to my community center's December gathering, another orphan event, this one a holiday cookie exchange combined with a coat drive. He brought Melissa's sister and the twins, who turned out to be delightful chaos machines with a talent for getting frosting in their hair. Melissa stayed home with a migraine, but her absence felt more like relief than rejection this time. Harold now joins me for coffee every Tuesday, sharing stories about his late wife and teaching me to play chess. The Retired Teacher's Book Club meets in my apartment once a month. The young couple with the baby had us all over to help decorate their first Christmas tree. We're building something, not a replacement family, but an expansion of what family can mean. Sometimes, rejection is just redirection. Sometimes, the moment someone decides you don't belong is exactly when you find where you truly do. And sometimes, the best family gatherings aren't about blood relations at all. They're about the messy, beautiful connections we make when we're brave enough to sit at a table with strangers and call it home. The community center has already put Orphan Thanksgiving on next year's calendar. They've given us the big haul this time. We're going to need it.